NFV is the first step on what is becoming a multi-cloud strategy for CSPs. Service architectures have to embrace not only physical and virtual functions, but also private and public clouds, edge and cloud native strategies. Joining me to discuss the issues today, I'm delighted to say I have four distinguished guests. Starting on my far right, Klaus Martiny. Klaus Martiny is chair of ETSI's ZSM ISG group. Next to Klaus, we have Sumit Verdi, director of the Lighthouse Solutions Telco NFV at VMware. Thanks for joining, Sumit. On my immediate left, I have Paul Brittain, VP Product Strategy at Metaswitch. And next to Paul is Patrick Kelly, who is founder and principal analyst at Appledore Research. Thank you all for joining us. We are, as I said, operating very much in a multi-cloud world, and increasingly so. But what does that really mean for CSPs? Sumit?
Yeah, so looking at the transformations that are happening about in the industry, purely fueled by the 5G ready transformations. So CSPs are actually looking at how do they actually realize these next generation use cases and kind of look at new opportunities for them as such. Migrating out of their existing kind of private single siloed data centers into more, as you alluded to, the edge-based kind of topologies, and also entering more and more so into the enterprise branch type of use cases, as well as the IoT class of use cases as well. Basically bringing on board different classes of gateway type of infrastructures as well on the edges. So this whole composition of these various type of use cases needs to be enabled by this class of a multi-cloud topology to essentially sort of leverage both the combination of the infrastructure and the 5G technologies.
Great. And Klaus?
Well, I think you're so right what you said. It has a direct impact to all what we're doing in terms of service introduction and service deployment processes. Because from a network manager point of view, we need complete different process to do that. I think that is a very important topic from a network management point of view.
Well, Patrick and Paul. Paul first, eh?
I think actually one of the key challenges will be how to get end-to-end analytics out of that mix of multiple cloud technologies, edge, core data centers, maybe public. Somehow you've got to bring all that data together, or you can't do the end-to-end service assurance. So I think that'll be an interesting problem for them to solve. And we, as the NFVI vendors and the VNF vendors, we can help be flexible enough to fit with what they need there.
Yeah, one of the other areas that's obviously a lot of active investment in is SD-WAN as a substitution technology for B2B remote branch connectivity. So one of the challenges most operators have is, how do they take their existing management systems and processes and support that in an SD-WAN environment? And fundamentally, what we look at is where you can actually get some efficiency gains, both on the OpEx side, not just strictly looking at CapEx, and clearly some of the thoughts around automation and the use of analytics, we think will be applied to that specific domain as in the SD-WAN, not across the board, but in that particular domain for starters.
So if you look at NFV, what role will NFV ultimately play in a multi-cloud world?
Well, if you look at it this way, the ideal VNF, cloud native VNF, is very agnostic to the environment it's running in. It can be in a private data center, it can be in public cloud, it can be cloud bursting from one to the other. Some bits of it may be pushed down towards the edge, depending on what the VNF is. So the environment for NFV is changing quite fast, and what we need to be able to do is to automate what I'm afraid to say is extra complexity we're bringing to the operator. We're implementing, in some cases, new services for the end user, and in many cases it's familiar sort of concepts, but they're being spread into a more distributed environment. And that's where we're going to need the automation that comes hand in hand with NFV to cope with the extra layers and complexity that we're adding into their network structure.
And Klaus, do you see this the same way?
I have a question for him because I found it interesting, as you mentioned, artificial intelligence in this context. How you said, what do you mean with that one?
I think that's a very interesting concept, yes. So for AI to work, and it should be able to help a lot, especially with optimization, what you need to solve first is to get a common sort of database of useful KPIs out of the components of the service. If you can't get that, then it's very hard for the machine learning to kick in. So I think one of the areas that ETSI and other standards will be able to help with a lot is to come up with an information model that will enable AI by giving us that sort of commonality of analytics.
Okay, I agree with that. Now I understand it better what you mentioned. Okay, I'm fine.
And so, what's VMware's take on the positioning of NFV?
So, agree with Paul and Klaus. I think in addition, right, the whole impetus behind this is service agility, right? Essentially taking the complexities around managing a multi-vendor, service type of an environment and kind of basically harmonizing that into something that is more ready for enabling a faster time to market, as you had alluded to as well, I think is a key driver, right? So now, in addition to that, as we basically go down this path of enabling these type of infrastructure environments, we also introduce kind of new ways of executing services as well, both virtualized, containerized based services as well. The networks are no longer static anymore, right? We've got workloads that are in motion. We've got essentially dynamic optimization basically that is happening. So kind of stitching to their comments, the service assurance aspect is really critical now within these NFV environments, such as you can essentially sort of leverage all of the real-time intelligence to essentially keep a healthy state of these dynamic networks.
Can I move on slightly? Patrick, we look at this very diverse architectures. How on earth do CSPs and their ecosystem partners, how do they manage all this?
One of the obstacles is you have existing workflow processes in a lot of these organizations, and the systems in many cases have been there a long time. So we kind of look at, if you look at automation, it's you can look at it as a derivative of the fulfillment and assurance stack. We now have dubbed the term closed loop automation, but I think what most service providers need to be aware of in their organizations is they first need to change their workflow processes and not try and build another management stack that just simply is doing fulfillment and assurance. Because the way we see it is the two systems, there's a symbiotic relationship between what happens. So we're talking about data ingest of telemetry events. In some operators' environments, there's billions of events coming in. How do you pull those events in real time, get the data structure and the model that operates across both the assurance and fulfillment stack to drive changes? So if you have a problem and there's a service impacting event, that should be able to create a trigger from the assurance stack into your fulfillment or orchestration stack to either reconfigure or reinstantiate new instances of a VNF to avoid that service impact. But that implies automation, so you have to take the human being out of the equation, right? Because we're talking about a highly complex environment. It's both going to be physical and virtual for a very long time, 10 plus years. So how do we change the mindset of I need to be able to touch everything and start driving more automation into the workflow process?
Well, Klaus, magic word, automation.
Automation work is a fantastic word because everybody talking about automation at all, from different point of view and different interpretations. But I have a question for you as well, sorry for asking, because you mentioned the information model and the data model. I think one of the biggest obstacles is that we have different information model, and everybody is trying to secure their information model, their own information model. How do you see that? How we can come to a common information model, or is it better to go directly to the data model? How do you see that?
Certainly the standards bodies are going to help in that area. What we typically see as an industry analyst market research firm is in order to get the innovation, you may have a proprietary data model that gets implemented in the commercial software space to actually get the service to market. And as such, if you look at that data model, it needs to work in a inventory system, it needs to work in an assurance system, and in the orchestration system. They all need to be operating off a consistent data set. If not, then you can't really achieve your end state goal of automation, and I don't want to say end-to-end automation because that's too loaded of a word, but if I go back to SD-WAN and you want to close the loop in that specific domain, you need to have that shared model work across each of the separate systems and that effectively are performing the function of either inventory assurance or fulfillment.
I agree partially.
Partially, okay.
Partially.
Yeah.
Why partially? Because I think to change the data model is very difficult to do so. To achieve a common information model, that should be not easy, but simpler than to agree on a common data model. I think that could be a step in between. That is the reason why I say partially agree, because first we have to find maybe a common understanding about the data information model, and maybe in the second step about the data model. That is what we're discussing in the ISG ZSM, how we can achieve automation, maybe also can agree on a common information model.
Well, let's look at some of the other solutions that are on other requirements here. I mean, when we look at service assurance solutions, what are we most likely to be considering, first and foremost?
Truly kind of connecting the previous point over here, right? We're really looking at an ecosystem that is basically stitched by both a combination of technology and standards, right? So kind of basically looking at that from that perspective. For us, within our vCloud NFV platform, we essentially have the entire service assurance capabilities baked into the platform as an integral function because it is absolutely essential. So we've talked about automation, right? You can't really do automation if you've got non-real-time implementation. So real-time, as an example, is a key kind of underpinning need from a service assurance perspective that can essentially drive all of the telemetry consumption and the automation such that we can actually kind of, keep the quality of service and quality of experience actually available from an end-to-end perspective, right? Starting from, the day zero onboarding and continuing down into the day two operations.
And I think that will come in stages as well, because going back to your debate about the information model, and there's multiple layers there. Some layers are quite easy to do almost in an isolated environment. So per VNF, the first thing to solve to give good service assurance is actually automated healing, a lifecycle action. That can be implemented in a fairly isolated environment for that. But when you want to start looking at the end-to-end user experience, then you have to start building out a common database or even a common microservice that you're using to collect the telemetry that you're going to drive those actions out of. And that may be based around a common data model or information model, or it may be something that to start off with is just delivering something like Grafana-based dashboards or some means to visualize what's going on. And then we can bring in the more complete end-to-end automation going forwards. Agile may be the way to do it.
Yeah, and if I may add to that as well, right? I mean, actually having that complete layer cake view, right? Looking at, and again, to your earlier point as well, right? This is truly going to be a hybrid environment. As the transformation is basically moving into virtualization, you're still going to have hybrid physical assets, but you really need that full correlated context, spanning from services, as Paul, you mentioned, all the way down to the actual physical elements, connecting up to the transports and the networks across all of these different multi-cloud environments.
We're approaching the end of our discussion, but can I have a final word from all of you, if I may? What's your advice for CSPs looking to deliver service assurance in hybrid networks and clouds? Klaus, what's a general piece of advice for what we should be looking at now?
Well, I think we should allow the processes, how we deliver that, and then we have to find a proper way how we can bring the process in a technical implementation. I think that should be done now. And because if we do it later, then it's too late.
Sumit, any thoughts about what CSPs should be looking at?
Yeah, I think they need to be considering service assurance as an integral part of their transformation today as opposed to an after fact, right? The second aspect of it, I think we've covered about it as well, is the more standardization as well. It's truly a multi-vendor environment, standards-based kind of representations from information models and so forth, essentially being able to drive that agility towards real-time quick decisions.
I agree with both of those, but what I'd add is don't wait for perfection. It's a classic case where the cloud approach of try it, learn from it, refine it is what you're going to need, because it's a very fast changing area and the way to plug that together end to end is going to change. So go out and do some of it and work with early projects and then do the better version. But don't wait for the final 5 year down the road perfection, or you'll never get anything done.
Yeah,
And Patrick.
And I think my advice would be to start small. So pick a particular service, try and de-risk as much as you can for that particular service. And then we've been talking about automation. If you are looking at automation, try some things out, and maybe there is a open loop initially where events come up in the system, and in order to get that degree of validation, you still have a human operator inserted in before you actually change the configurations, the infrastructure. If you're comfortable with that, then you can move to more full-scale automation, for that particular service.
Trust building, I think, is a very important part of it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Patrick, Paul, Klaus and Summit, thank you all very much indeed for joining us on Telecom TV. Thank you.
Thank you.